give a warm welcome to Mr. Riedel.
What was the start of the universe like? Are there other Earth-like planets? Can we predict earthquakes? Can we cure cancer? Can we predict and prevent heart attacks? Can we sustainably fuel the world? Supercomputing turns dreams into ideas that can change the world. Dare to think the impossible.
High-performance computing is like all of the big instruments of science combined into one. So it's a telescope that enables us to view the entire universe. It's a microscope or a particle accelerator which enables us to explore the quantum world of the very small. It's a reactor that enables us to study plasmas and what's going on in the interior of stars. And it's even a time machine which enables us to recreate the past or to predict what's going to happen in the future. Almost all of the major challenges that society faces, whether it's preserving our environment, improving our health care, or rebuilding our economy, are underpinned in some way or another by high-performance computing.
Hello. Hi. Welcome to the data track. I have the opportunity and the honor to get you back from lunch. And I see here some sleepy eyes on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side. So I hope the video at least got you a little bit awakened, and I hope to get more details to you what high-performance computing means, what it can do, and what societal impacts it can do. It's a topic I like to talk about because I'm already 10 years in the field of parallel and distributed computing, driven by HPC, as we call it. And we explain several contexts here, although the real technical difficulties I have a little bit left out, but please feel free to contact me after the talk. I will be around also tomorrow if you would like to know more. So let me firstly explain why you see a bridge. And I would like to offer you the chance of seeing high-performance computing as a bridge. I will explain more later on, perhaps shortly, why I'm standing here before we going into bridges and high-performance computing. I'm leading a research group in Jülich. That's one of the national supercomputing centers and a big research center with 4,000 employees. And we have a close collaboration here with the University of Iceland. In fact, I'm here an associated professor. And we have joined PhD students going back and forth and offer some courses in the field of high-performance computing and statistical data mining, where I would like to come back to you later on. So now if you hear high-performance computing, let's see what it's all about. We have established principles in science, and these can be best explained in two pillars. If you see a bridge, there are sometimes pillars. Now there's experiments that we have in science, which means we observe the nature, like the bird here, where we got data from residuals, and from this we think about a theory, which is the second pillar of science. So this means we have an abstract idea how an airplane could fly, but still flapping wings in an airplane is still a concept we not really understand yet. Da Vinci was more far in that, but still there's a gap between them. And high-performance computing is actually filling this gap. So many people think that high-performance computing is actually something where you can just use it and you don't need theory anymore. You don't need experiment anymore. And that is awfully wrong, right? It's not the third pillar of science as it is often quoted. It's much more a bridge connecting both worlds with simulations over time. They are numerical, known physical laws where we simulate several aspects, and these simulations are actually very computational intensive, and that's why we need the supercomputers that you have heard in the videos. And this enables us to really simulate parts of the airplane, to understand and manufacture them in engineering much more better than we could otherwise, like for instance turbines, like wings that have more economic, and so on. So this is basically high-performance computing from a 10,000 feet perspective, the bridge between experiments and theory. Now let's look a little bit further. When we need this computing power, we're talking about the simulations. They must be very fast because they're very computational intensive. So what means fast is something which we call flops. And let me explain this a little bit. So flops stands actually for floating point operations per second, right? And you see here a very interesting supercomputing power here on the left there from the 1980s. It was a Toshiba laptop. Of course, at that point in time, it was a breakthrough that you can carry around a supercomputer, more or less, because it could already do 1 million floating point operations per second. So this is already remarkable. If you think you don't need a big hall, you don't need something specific in terms of infrastructure, you just carry it around. However, now we improved a bit in this direction, and as you see here in the video that will follow, we have here a machine with roughly 300,000 cores around 2009. It was called Eugene, and this was already much more far advanced. It was another breakthrough, if you will, because we came into the so-called petaflop area. And what does it mean is basically best explained in the zeros here, if you think about what humans can do in a second. And now you have here the 1,000 billion, some call it a billiard. We scientists like to quote it 10 to the 15 floating point operations per second with 300,000 cores. It was remarkable at that point in time. It was actually also, this machinery, the fastest supercomputer in Europe for a while. Of course, the Americans have a little bit more money. They're mostly on number one, and the Chinese also. But for Europe, this was already very much advanced. So the other message I would like to convene is, it's not like a laptop anymore, unfortunately. If you want to program it, if you want to understand this complex system, you best look at the video and understand what it means to have a supercomputer. We see here a lot of cables and an upgrade from a supercomputer called Eugene to a next supercomputer called UQueen, which are used for high-performance computing. But you immediately see these are complex machines. And we need these complex machines for complex sciences and engineering problems. And actually what you don't see so much is there is a second floor, so there are lots of cable also underneath. There's water cooling these days, so there's a big infrastructure needed, so no small laptop anymore from Toshiba, unfortunately. However, what we achieved with this is, in the moment, like 5 petaflops. That is already something, and if you think about cores, it's roughly 500,000 cores to program. And this is also a challenge for scientists that really have to program this, right? It's also not Java, simple C programming. You have concurrency and parallel computing to do in order to tackle these scientific problems. So let's look a little bit into that to explore techniques, how we actually program a supercomputer. And there would be many aspects of it. I try to bring some very practical one where you have perhaps a land cover mass and you would like to have a simulation how it is in reality to understand some physical processes. So you would have, basically in this example, 3 different physical models. You would have a groundwater model coming from the bottom, you would have a land surface model, and then you would have an atmospheric model. So you basically have 3 models that are interacting, exchanging physical parameters. It's absolutely not simple, and a laptop would have immediately limits to actually compute this, especially if you want to have it on a spatial / more time domain. So what we do is a technique called domain decomposition in high-performance computing. This is best explained when you look on the bottom. So we basically chop the whole area into parts with some overlaps. We call halo regions, where we exchange and keep some parameters to make the computing more tricky. But this is a technical detail. However, they are not isolated from each other, right? As you see here, they're actually communicating quite a lot. These red arrows you see here between processor 1, 2, 3, and 4 are actually very low latency connections and a high throughput special dedicated hardware connections. So basically some protocols, if you're a little bit familiar with the internet, how it works, some ISO layers are basically on chip and in hardware. That's why it's extremely quick and much more quicker than any software. However, this also makes high-performance computing very costly. Then this interconnection is exactly the difference between all the systems you heard in clouds with embarrassingly parallel systems that are not so tightly interconnected. However, this is brilliant for scientific problems to understand lots of nature and lots of physical laws in nature. And if you have this domain decomposition technique, we use it in many, many scientific areas. You see here, reaching from energy, material construction, bridges simulations, until weather. In fact, weather, like weather.is, the weather that you always see, or weather.com for our guests, of course, this is numerical weather prediction behind it. So they use high-performance computing in the back to actually predict what the weather would be. The numerical comes in because it's an approximation. You probably have realized that is not always accurate to the point. It's in many cases very accurately and can good predict, but sometimes it's just wrong. But that's the game. And another area where high-performance computing is used practically daily in society. However, today I want to talk a little bit more about societal challenges. So why is high-performance computing so high and important in the moment? You have here a couple of examples related to safety, which is one of the key societal challenges in the moment, especially now with terror attacks and so on. You have seen that. You see here basically a simulation of an evacuation of a stadium. And if you would assume that a human is kind of a very circular behavior, it's actually quite wrong. And if you do your construction of evacuation plans of the stadium, of corridors, with this assumption, it's pretty bad. Because if you have a real situation, you will see suddenly that the man or woman is actually an ellipse more when according to speed, and actually also an ellipse while standing. And this has lots of effects in several models. I sketched here one on the top, where you have evacuation scenarios which are then very different, like it was computed in the past. And HPC is basically behind these models to make that actually happen. So another technique I would like to explain here a little bit to get some technical detail covered is we have, for instance, here the situation in the metro, and there are some visitors. It's perhaps not recommended to take this way, as these gentlemen and lady is doing there. But still, evacuation of this is also very important in terms of what happens when a fire comes. So there are actually engineers and scientists that use HPC for doing smoke simulations in these metros. And with this, we have a technique called adaptive mesh refinement that you see here on the bottom. You will see this discretization that I did with chopping up the area which is simulated was very equal before. The adaptive mesh refinement that you see here allows us to make some fine-grained detail simulation in some area where it's very important, like where the fire is, where lots of smoke is. Or in some areas where the smoke is still not there, we can have just coarse-grained parallelization and computing power. And this enables us to much more put the focus on the computing where it's really actually is important. And then you can go on and on. High-performance computing lives from the detail. You could say that. You can always make more details. You see here a metro station. Then you basically can zoom in and have one particular metro station inside a train. And then it actually matters what type of materials you have. So there are scientists using high-performance computing to burn trains. So if you again do that in an experiment, it gets very costly very quickly. At least in German, the train providers will just give you 5 to 6 trains, I assume. Then they will stop. Please don't burn our trains anymore. And the good thing in HPC, you have seen that in the video, dare to think the impossible. We can do a lot of things which would be not possible by just doing it in an experiment. However, experiments are still needed to have validation data to develop these simulations according to natural laws and physical phenomena we want to simulate correctly, of course. Then the next societal challenge, very important, is improving our healthcare. There are extremely many examples. I picked here 2, which are quite interesting. One of it is, of course, tackling our problem in the industrial world that is mostly related to heart diseases. And if you are waiting for a donor of a heart, it could take sometimes time, and basically engineers and scientists use high-performance computing to create a blood pump. It's roughly like a finger in size, 10,000 turns basically per second, and is accelerating your blood flow. So until a donor is found, this has, for instance, saved already many lives in the US where the manufacturer is doing this. There are already 440 patients we know that have this already in their body and would basically be dead if they would have not have this device in their body. And of course, there are lots of details with it. The blood flow must be, according to certain pressure, otherwise the body will reject it. Then you have some blood cells that could be crushed by having too much technicalities. So there are lots of, engineering design which is not so easy to be done in an experiment. Then on the other end, perhaps on the scale in the nanometers, we have proteins. Proteins are the workhorses of the body. They basically steer biochemical processes. If there are infections, they have specific shapes and go against them, so they're kind of antibodies. They're working in this. But the problem is they only work according to plan if they shape in the correct 3D structure. And unfortunately, what we still not understand in science is really when is the misfolding happening? And we believe in many cases that this could lead to Alzheimer's diseases, for instance, when this misfolding is happening. So what scientists are doing is actually trying to simulate more and more of this protein foldings to get some of the structures at least explained in order to have some idea how we can tackle diseases, how we can treat diseases, like we have seen in Alzheimer's and other diseases we probably don't know even yet. It's a really huge combination, so it's not something what a theoretical, let's say, protein folder could do on paper. It would take a long time. On the other end, the experiment will also not give you so much hints. Of course, we have some patient data where we can validate against, but still having, again, this bridge of high-performance computing accelerates this process. That's why also high-performance computing. We try to get things faster. Then there's still one challenge. If I'm standing here, I'm talking maybe like everything is solved. It's quite the opposite, in fact. There's many scientific challenges we still work on, and high-performance computing is a lot involved. And one of the key challenges I wanted to bring to you today, which is the brain. So the human brain, the understanding of this and how it works is a key aspect where we all work on in the scientific community. Also, again, on different scales, right, from different diseases down to the nanometers again. And the key challenge is here really to simulate this, because it's a supercomputer on its own. Yeah, it has unbelievable many interconnections. You see this a little bit here in the video. This is just a 4 square millimeter area, and you see the lots of fiber channels, the interconnections and neurons that we have in our brain. And we are roughly now at the stage where we can have 4.5% of the human brain simulated, right? So instead of having really an understanding, we're still, let's say, starting with all of this. Still, high-performance computing gives us already some insights in neurological diseases, which is very important. It's also affecting the industrial world much more than you would think. And then this is, on the other hand, a very promising field, because we have still the, let's say, 25-watt brain here, and it is a supercomputer, while our UTmessan machine we have seen is about 2.3 million watt, which is used. So there are also some hope to get a new kind of supercomputer out of the idea how a brain is working. But this would require an exaflop machine. And there are actually several challenges also, not only in improving healthcare, also when you think about preserving our environment. Here we have the simulation that we have performed in our computers for Eyjafjallajökull. I hope that is okay. I solved the test, okay. But it's a very complex machinery. Again, you see here on the side lots of physical complex processes that need to interact. I talked with you before the surface, land surface, the atmospheric coupling, and then the groundwater coupling. These were just 3 models we couple. Now, if you go to a real simulation of some environmental process, you have easily 20 processes, different numerical laws you have to integrate. So there are still lots of work to be done. Then on the other hand, you have big data challenges. The more we do high-performance computing, and big data is now a hype, but still we face it really. It goes from terabytes to petabytes now. The more we simulate, the bigger the machines will be, we have even more data to digest. So actually we have now the problem that many of the aspects we face are actually data limited and not computing limited. Speaking of data, there's another aspect where we basically have a societal challenge of rebuilding our economy. That is also what you can do with high-performance computing. It is used in many fields, like, for instance, here, machine learning in parallel, classification, where you have some data and you want to classify it as this or that group, or clustering mechanisms, where you basically have an idea of a group roughly based on similarity measures, or want to compute trends and slopes of certain data. And as the big data grows, you need high-performance computing with lots of memory to actually get the data processed. We have several occasions where we use MATLAB, R, or Weka and other serial methods, which are actually not working anymore. Let me give you an example which also nicely illustrates our collaboration with the University of Iceland from the Jülich Supercomputing Center. This is a very fascinating scenario out of remote sensing. So it's a 52 classes problem where we want to have satellite images and want to classify the land cover, right? And we did this with a supercomputer, and you see here some results in terms of time. So the best parameter set we broke down from 14 minutes down to 1 minute. And then when we basically have the whole process of a scientist, because he never has directly all the correct parameters, he has to search for them, we have actually results where we go from 9 hours to half an hour. And if you think about this across all scientists, of course, we can do a lot of difference also when working on big data analytics, as it is in the moment called. This was a study done with a PhD student of Jon Atle Benediktsson, our new head of the university, and has led to a very nice publication. And this is only possible to do high-performance computing. Okay, so at the end, coming slowly to the end, I would like to do some answering question now. I think one of the questions some of you may ask, or normally they come after me, is, can we do this in Iceland? And the clear answer is yes. We have here an NHPC system that you can use, and there are several options. Actually, it's not the only one that you can use. And of course, we are also there, so you can approach us, because don't underestimate that you cannot just throw your industrial problem or your problem you have on a supercomputer and it will run. It requires a process called application enabling, for which you need the skills to actually do domain decomposition, to do Halo, inter-process communication, and lots of other things. And with this, you would be at the second question, I guess, which is also my final slide, where I do some self-marketing here and say, if you're interested in this field and you need to obtain some skills, we're offering at the University of Iceland several courses in that area. High-performance computing A, for instance, which is really about numerical laws, parallel programming on large supercomputers, but also on smaller clouds if you want to stepwise move towards big computers. There's very technical aspects in it, like MPI, OpenMP, and these are the aspects how you really program it. I couldn't touch that today. But it's not easy to actually do that, and that's why it's very important for you to take away the message that we have here experts in the University of Iceland that also would help you if there are applications there. Then on the other end, when it's more data intensive, we have statistical data mining, machine learning in parallel, with established, let's say, techniques and algorithms that we also have in parallel already implemented, support vector machines, artificial neural nets, these aspects. And we teach that also at the University of Iceland. Then, of course, GPUs is a very attractive topic. Some of you may have heard about it. Also, this starts now in our course curricula. We're talking about these GPUs. And with this, I would say the talk will be online on my webpage. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think we have a couple of minutes for questions from the audience. So please raise your hands. Over there. Could you talk a bit higher, louder?
So you're doing so much with polarization. How much realistic impact do you see with quantum computers in this field? So the question was, if I repeat, if we do so much with parallel computing, how do we see quantum computing, right? Quantum computing. impact of this. So this reflects to a model, just to briefly explain, where we think that one of the next generations of supercomputers could be actually based on qubits. Now, what is a qubit? It is basically, if you can consider it as a vector instead of 0 and 1s. If you know how a computer operates today, it's 0, 1, 1, 0, lots of them. And the quantum computer would be much more accurate. So an easy answer to this question is we have simulated a lot of these qubits, but never really to a full sophistication. So it's, let's say, really still on that perspective out of practical concern. However, recently there was a company, also at our supercomputing center, the name I just dropped, but they have already one real one. And we know that, of course, government operations are really now looking much more onto this, and they get more funding. And with this, let's say, way to the practice could be much more accelerated. But it's not only this, it's also the way how you program it. So, of course, a qubit or a quantum computer programmed differently. You would not do the simulation that you used to do. So you have to have also the workforce to put things into practice, which would take another decade probably at least to have the full workforce to tackle scientific problems.
Okay. Any other questions? Back over there.
So are you doing here locally in the HPC infrastructure that you have access to? Are you doing any training for AI sets and the artificial intelligence training sets currently?
Yeah, exactly. So the question was if you do some artificial intelligence training, this reflects some of the machine learning algorithms we have heard earlier, classification, clustering, and so on, but in parallel. So, and if we do some training about this, that's correct. So one of the courses we have here is a statistical data mining course, where we take the established data mining and machine learning algorithms and actually work with them on HPC machines. That is traditionally not so easy, because it's like lots of technicalities that have to be done to get to a HPC machine, but we offer training there and have even a course there in this area. Yeah? Follow-on question?
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear enough. I was just asking about whether you're offering courses. I mean, are you doing any training of AI sets? I mean, the newest trend, I guess, in AI is creating these large training sets of data, which provides you with the underlying trends that are in the sets. So I'm asking if that has migrated here, this kind of processing.
Okay. So the question was if you really take existing data sets and train on them then, and basically we do that partly. For one example was this remote sensing data set. So we trained a support vector machine based on labeled data. That's what we call when we know already which pixel is what. So one is corn, one is water, one is something else. And we trained this machinery and apply it to unseen data. And with this, it's very important that the accuracy remain, what we actually still hold. Even if we go in parallel and accelerate the process, we still can keep the accuracy, which is a very important process. And we do lots of trainings, to be honest. So we have seen deep learning more recently. That's basically an artificial neural nets, very deep and very new structured and new algorithms. And with this, basically, we have lots of data sets like brain images. They do tissue, non-tissue. And it's not so easy to do because mostly when you have it in ice, the brain, there shines some background through, so it actually disturbs a bit the classifier. But we have several data sets we have. In order of the time here, I would say just approach me afterwards, and then we can talk perhaps a bit more in detail on what exactly we train here at HAUI.
Okay, so give it up for Mr. Riedel.
Thank you.